Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be ranking all 9 seasons of Dexter. This includes the original 8 seasons and the Dexter New Blood miniseries. So after watching the show in its entirety, I will say that while Dexter is a good show, it definitely made a few mistakes along the way. If you want to check out my reviews for each and every season first, I have a playlist for that. Ranking the seasons of this show was pretty interesting. The seasons I don't like were easy to rank, and the seasons I did like were actually a bit tricky, and it took me a while to figure out which ones I liked more than others. So just a couple of disclaimers before we begin. Firstly, this list is entirely subjective and solely my opinion. Secondly, I have not read the books just yet, but I will get to that in the future at some point. And lastly, this video will be swarming with spoilers. So watch the show in its entirety and then come back to this video. But for everyone else, let's begin. So coming in at number 9, and I'm pretty sure you can all guess which one this is, Season 8. Yep, you guessed it. The season that pretty much tarnished the overall legacy of the show for more than 8 years is my least favorite, and in general, a terrible season of Dexter. Where do I begin with this one? What were the positives? Well, the cinematography was good as usual, the music was great, the acting was superb, and there was some small things here and there, like Deb getting back together with Quinn at the end, even if it didn't last long. Sean Patrick Flannery's character was okay. And even Charlotte Rampling's character, Dr. Vogel, was somewhat interesting. The problem with this season is that on paper, a lot of the ideas on display sounded pretty cool, but the execution was just very messy. For instance, this season played it very safe. Instead of picking up where season 7 left off, it does a time jump to about 6 months later. None of the side characters figure out that Dexter's the Bay Harbor Butcher, and it pretty much follows the typical Dexter formula. You know, there's a new serial killer out and about, the side characters have their own side stories, and because of all of this, it doesn't feel like the final season until the last 2 or 3 episodes. For the majority of the time, it just feels like another season of Dexter. It has so many characters and storylines across its 12 episodes, and yet it managed to be so incredibly boring at times. You know, it just lacked the urgency you would expect out of a final season of television. The side characters were relegated to subplots that didn't really go anywhere and pretty much added nothing to the plot. And even some of the new characters in the season, like the photographer kid who seems to have a dark passenger of his own, were killed off by the brain surgeon before they could even do anything. Speaking of which, the brain surgeon is one of the worst villains in the entire show. His motives were too similar to that of the ice truck killer, in the sense that he holds a personal grudge against Dexter. And I get that having a serial killer as the main villain is part of the Dexter formula, but in some ways, this guy didn't really need to be in the final season. They could have found a way to tell this story without him. I mean, this is the only season he's in, and then he's killed off at the end by Dexter, proving that this felt like, once again, just another season of Dexter until the last few episodes. Then of course you have all the retconning. Batista suddenly becoming a cop again 6 months later, Lieutenant Matthews coming out of retirement, and just the fact that Harry didn't actually create the code for Dexter. It was passed on to him by Dr. Vogel. On paper it sounds good, but at this point in the show it's just way too late. And of course the atrocious finale. One of the worst finales in TV history. It just did so many things wrong. The way that the brain surgeon snuck into the hospital Deborah was in made no sense. Dexter stabbing him in the neck to his death and getting away with it, yeah, that was baffling. Deborah's death, which was emotional but kind of unsatisfying. Harrison never seeing his father again for years and having to spend some of that time with Hannah means that we couldn't see the 3 of them together in the end. The lack of closure for various side characters, and of course Dexter becoming a lumberjack while in the middle of nowhere. All of his character development throughout the entire show felt undone. And I know that the people who disliked Dexter New Blood as well as its ending have warmed up to this season a little bit, but this is still a testament on how not to make a final season. So for that, I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 10. Coming in at number 8, and this might be controversial, so brace yourselves, Season 3. Now, there are plenty of people who like this season, and if you do, that's great. I really wanted to enjoy it as much as you did, but I just couldn't, especially upon reflection. It's not flat out terrible, but it's just kind of okay, I guess. The reasons why I don't like it is because Season 1 established the formula, Season 2 changed it up, and in Season 3 they just kind of played it safe by going back to the formula of Season 1, so it recycles a lot of familiar elements from that season and does very little to change things up. It also felt drawn out and occasionally boring compared to Seasons 1 and 2. It just lacked the urgency and tension of those seasons. Plus, as far as the villains go, it seemed like the season couldn't decide who its main villain was supposed to be. Yes, the Skinner is established from the get-go as the primary antagonist, but he's very weak. In fact, he's the weakest villain in the entire show. He lacks the sense of nuance or depth you would expect out of other villains on the show. McLeod was a great villain, but he doesn't really become a villain until the last 3 or 4 episodes, and he's killed off in the penultimate episode, which leaves the Skinner as the main villain for the finale, and he just wasn't interesting enough to carry that episode on his own. And then there's just the mere fact that the season feels very inconsequential in the long run. It feels very standalone, very self-contained, and the only important things that contribute to the show going forward are Deborah's relationship with Anton Briggs, the introduction of Quinn, and Dexter getting pressured into marriage by Rita after she reveals that she's pregnant with Harrison. But when you think about it, this season wasn't completely without merit. The dynamic between Dexter and McLeod was pretty interesting, and it was made even better by Jimmy Smith's amazing performance. Dexter being very nervous about the prospect of becoming a father at the beginning of the season, and then as the series progresses, he warms up to that idea. And of course the introduction to Quinn, who has just been transferred from the narcotics department to the homicide department. So overall, this wasn't a terrible season, but it's nothing special. It has its moments, but overall, it's kind of bland in certain areas, and I'm gonna give it a 6 out of 10. Coming in at number 7 is gonna be Season 6. Now, like many fans out there, I didn't like Season 6 either, but I don't think it's as terrible as everyone makes it out to be. And it's not terrible at all, it's actually okay. It had a lot of interesting ideas, but again, the execution was kind of messy. It follows the typical Dexter formula and does very little to change it up. You know, Dexter realizes he's not all that much of a sociopath. In this case, it's through his friendship with brother Sam. The side characters being relegated to specific subplots, and as usual, there's a serial killer out on the loose. Or in this case, 2 killers, because this season had the Doomsday Killers. And they started out just fine, you know, they commit ritualistic killings in order to punish the wicked because they see themselves as servants of God. So this season deals with religion quite a bit, and if that's not your thing, you're probably not gonna like it. I'm agnostic, so it didn't really bother me all that much. The killings involve a lot of overt Christian symbolism, which was too heavy-handed for most people, but for me it was okay because the practical effects in some of these killings were awesome. The master-apprentice dynamic between Travis Marshall and James Gallo was pretty interesting. However, the infamous twist that Travis isn't committing these killings because James wants him to atone for his sins and to get closer to God, but because James has been dead the whole time and is simply a figment of Travis's imagination, and Travis is just flat out insane. That ruined the dynamic of their master-apprentice relationship. Plus, I had issues with some of the side characters as well. LaGuerta went back to square one. She became selfish and career-centered for some reason, I don't know. And while Quinn's friendship with Batista was interesting, him becoming a bar-hopping, drunken, lazy frat boy got old very quickly. And again, like season 3 before it, it feels like a very standalone season. Most of what happens feels very inconsequential in the long run, except for the introductions to some of the new characters and the storyline with Deborah, as well as the cliffhanger ending. But there were some good things to come out of season 6. The introductions to Jamie, Batista's sister, and Louis Green, and even Brother Sam was a decent character. Religion as a theme, as well as the practical effects for the ritualistic killings. Even Deborah's feelings for Dexter is something I didn't mind. The return of Brian Moser was awesome. I know a lot of people wished he stuck around a bit longer, but honestly, I don't think he needed to. And of course the finale, with Deborah catching Dexter in the act. So overall, not a terrible season, but just not all that much of a good one either. So I'm gonna give it a 6 out of 10. So coming at number 6 is gonna be season 5. Now this would have been a great season of Dexter had it not been for the finale, and we'll get to that in a bit. This season definitely had some good things going for it. Dexter's dynamic with Lumen, the leader of the Barrel Girl gang, Jordan Chase was pretty interesting, Quinn hooking up with Deborah and hiring Stan Liddy to spy on Dexter. But it had a few flaws here and there. For instance, it follows the typical Dexter formula and does very little to change things up. The subplots were also a little bit weak. For example, Batista's divorce from LaGuardia results in a lot of melodrama, and the subplot involving Deborah hunting down a Hispanic gang ends so abruptly that it's easy to forget it was even part of the season to begin with. And then there's the finale. Now, I enjoyed virtually everything about it, and I didn't even mind Lumen parting ways with Dexter. I get that they did this because Julia Stiles wanted to leave the show, but thematically, the send-off for her made sense. It was still better than killing her off, honestly. The thing that I don't like, and pretty much everybody else hates, is the contrived way that Dexter and Lumen managed to get away from Deborah. She just lets them go upon catching them because she assumed they were vigilantes exacting revenge on the Barrel Girl gang, and she felt sorry for them, so yeah. I get why they chose to do this, but honestly, it's really silly when you think about it. This could have been an opportunity for Deborah to finally catch Dexter in the act, and they didn't take it. But nonetheless, this is still a season that I liked, even if it wasn't all that great. And I'm gonna give it a 7 out of 10. Coming in at number 5 is the new kid on the block, New Blood. So this was, for the most part, a satisfying way to wrap up Dexter's story. And just as a season of Dexter, it felt familiar in some ways and fresh in others. The setting of Iron Lake, production values and the visual style, the depiction of Dexter all these years later, the return of several familiar faces such as Deborah, Harrison, the cameo from the Trinity Killer, and the 2 appearances from Batista. The new characters were likable, such as Angela, Audrey, and Logan. Kurt Caldwell was an excellent villain, and the send-off for Dexter was not the best choice they could have made, but still, it worked. But the season definitely suffered from its slow burn aesthetic. Some episodes were a bit too long, or the season as a whole just kind of meandered in certain areas. And while I enjoyed the finale, I definitely had some issues with it. The pacing was very uneven. I think Dexter spent way too much time in jail and very little time outside of jail, which meant that the build-up leading to Harrison turning on his father and then killing him felt rushed. And we never got to see a reunion between Batista and Dexter. Batista was actually on his way to Iron Lake, and for some reason we never got to see him after that. So yeah, there were definitely some missed opportunities with the finale, but still, it was good for the most part, and Harrison killing Dexter made perfect sense to me. Because here's the thing, Dexter was either going to die or he was going to get arrested. And even if he gets arrested, he is bound to get the death penalty. So either way, he dies. And when you think about it, in order for Harrison to live a normal life, Dexter needed to die. And I'm not gonna lie, upon watching the original series, there were moments in time when I thought to myself, as much as I like this guy, maybe he does deserve to get punished somehow. Yes, he technically did get punished at the end of season 8, But here, I think he can finally be at peace with everything he's done in a way. And Harrison can finally have the life he always wanted. So overall, this was a great ending to the show, even if it wasn't perfect. And I'm gonna give it an 8 out of 10. So coming in at number 4 is gonna be season 2. So this was the season where the Miami Metro Police were in pursuit of the Bay Harbor Butcher, not knowing that it's in fact Dexter. This was an interesting way to change up the formula rather than have Dexter and the Miami Metro Police pursue yet another serial killer. Plus, there were so many other great things about this season. Rita sending Dexter to rehab for an alleged addiction of his was interesting. Plus, we got more flashbacks between Harry and Dexter when he was younger. The relationship between Deborah and Lundy I find to be very underrated. Lila was a great villain and a unique love interest for Dexter. And of course, Dokes' obsession with Dexter throughout the season. And Dokes' death at the end was actually a pretty good send-off for him, given the fact that he and Dexter were able to come to somewhat of an understanding as to why Dexter does what he does. And a solid finale to wrap things up nicely, to the point where if the show had even ended here, I wouldn't mind at all. It would have gone down as one of the all-time greats in television history. However, it's way too early in the show to be telling the story. It should have been saved for the final season, and I think we would have gotten a much better final season than the one we got, and maybe, just maybe, a much better ending. But overall, season 2 was a solid follow-up to season 1, and in some ways, it was actually better than season 1. But because it chose to tell the Bay Harbor Butcher storyline this early in the show, I still think season 1 is a better season. So I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10. So coming in at number 3 is gonna be season 7. Season 7 is one of the most underrated seasons in the entire show, at least in my opinion. It brought so many fresh ideas to the table. Deborah knowing Dexter's secret and working alongside him to make sure that he doesn't get caught. Isaac Serco, who's the main antagonist, not being a serial killer but instead being a crime boss. That was a refreshing change of pace as well. The introduction to Hannah McKay, who I find to be one of Dexter's most underrated love interests. I mean, 2 serial killers in love. Just think about that. In fact, if I had to rank all of Dexter's love interests, it would go as follows. Deborah, Lila, Angela, Rita, Hannah, and then Lumen. You know, if Lumen had stuck around, I think that could have led to a lot of opportunities on the show. But then of course, we wouldn't have gotten Hannah, so there's that. And even the subplots as well. You know, Dexter finally coming face to face with the man responsible for his mother's death, Quinn's subplot with Nadia, and LaGuarta's return to the Bay Harbor Butcher case. And of course, it had one of the absolute best finales in the entire show, with Deborah killing LaGuarta, a scene that was actually improvised, not to mention very, very well. However, the season did lose its focus at times. You know, it jumps back and forth between the storylines with Isaac and Hannah, and then Isaac is killed off after just 9 episodes, which leaves 3 more episodes to go, and then instead of just jumping straight to the LaGuarta storyline, they introduce one of those weekly villains that should have been introduced much earlier. They shoehorn in Dexter's mother's killer when that should have been set up earlier on, and it just hurts the overall momentum of the season. But still, I really enjoyed the season for all of the good stuff, and I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10. So as for my top 2, we have Season 1 and Season 4. Season 1 was an excellent beginning for the show, whereas Season 4 is the one that everyone considers to be the best. However, for me personally, that isn't the case. So my number 2 pick is going to be Season 4. Now I love this season, don't get me wrong, I think it's one of the best seasons in TV history. Arthur Mitchell was an excellent villain, and this is quite possibly John Lithgow's scariest performance to date. The dynamic between him and Dexter was interesting, and just seeing Dexter trying to balance everything, from being a father to his double life, you know, his police work and his serial killer tactics at night. All of that was great, as well as the romance between Batista and LaGuerta, Lundy returning to Miami and reuniting with Deborah only to be killed off, and the finale, which of course had one of the most shocking twist endings in the history of television. My only complaint with it is that it did kind of meander a little bit towards the middle, but other than that, everything about this season was just phenomenal, and I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10. But my number one pick can only be Season 1. Now, the idea that this show peaked in its first season, at least for me and maybe a few other people out there, isn't a bad thing, because there were still some amazing seasons throughout the entire show. But Season 1 truly benefited just from being the beginning of the story. The idea of a blood spatter analyst leading a secret double life as a serial killer who goes after people who have slipped through the cracks of the justice system, all because of his dark passenger and his violent tendencies and urges which he's had since birth, all of that felt fresh in this first season, as well as the introductions to the side characters and the overall style and tone of the show. The show's dark humor, its use of monologues, the theme music, the violence, and the actual plot itself. It's well paced, it's well written, and the ice truck killer is my favorite villain in the entire show. His MO and the things that he does to kind of reach out to Dexter, as well as the reveal of him being Brian Moser the entire time, and Dexter's brother. All of this makes him the villain that I felt had the best emotional connection to Dexter, and the best motives, given the fact that he blames Dexter for how things turned out for him after their mother died. And there's practically nothing wrong with this season, it's absolutely flawless. So for that, I'm gonna give it a 10 out of 10. So yeah, that was my ranking of Dexter. This is another show that I'm gonna miss talking about because I really love this character and just everything about the show. As for the future of the series, if they do make a second season of New Blood or a Harrison spinoff, I don't think I'll be interested because I'm more than happy with the ending of New Blood. So yeah, we'll see what happens going forward. But that's definitely it for now. So as for the future of the channel, guys, I know that I was supposed to do a retrospective on the Scream franchise, but I've decided to cancel it. And any other videos I had planned going forward are also, unfortunately, on hold at the moment. I've got some other priorities that I need to focus on, and yeah, I'll be back at some point. I'm just not sure when. And yeah, that's it. Thank you all for watching, guys. Please be sure to like the video, share and subscribe, hit the notification icon. Be safe during this time, and don't worry, I'll see you soon.